Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with one another and with our God. That was our music director, Mark Bunce, with Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. And it is a blessing to have Mark and his music in this church. I'm the Reverend Jeff Frank of St. Paul's Universalist Church, and I welcome you to our online service. We will begin with the lighting of our chalice. We gather in this time of uncertainty, full of unknowns, as angst closes in upon us. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the dankness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. For this moment, this radical moment, we find a certainty within the knowable bounds of love and community. For our service, I'm going to ask you to be taking an imaginary journey with me, each of us in our own boat out upon the water. And that'll make more sense as we get into the sermon. But first, I'd like to open with these words written by Rod Richards. We who gather here in this tender and anxious and confusing time
We have been awash in a sea of information and misinformation and disinformation. And this information that we seek is simply so that we may make wise decisions about how we respond and learn how we hold one another when we can't hold one another, and decide how we can be when we can't be together. What is this we face? How best do we respond? And why is this happening? The why, the why, the why. And why do those who suffer so suffer most, always suffer? Suffer most from what we now face. Why? And what can we do for those who are most at risk, most vulnerable, all the time and now again? And how do we respond, and how do we hold one another when we can't hold one another? And how do we stay together and stick together and worship together when we cannot be together? Yet we are. Here we are. We are here together. We have a special treat for you today. Here's Mark Bunce, our music director, and Julie Smith, a member of our congregation and member of our choir, singing "Blessed Are They."
Holy are you.
Xanax. It's an anti-anxiety medication prescribed to at least 50 million people in this country. Anxiety disorders are the most prevalent form of mental illness, affecting 18% of American adults. That percentage is almost certainly higher in light of what's happening in this country and around the globe. These are worrisome times. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired. I'm tired of wearing these every time I go out in public. I'm tired of trying to stand at least 6 feet away from people. I'm tired of the one-way traffic signs in grocery stores, and tired of the fact that probably a fifth of the people, and that's being kind, don't follow the traffic signals. I'm tired of having to pause to remember what day it is. I'm worried about the future. When will this end? Will my friends and loved ones stay safe? How many more will die? How bad will the economy get? Do the governments of the world know what they're doing? Or are they just making it up as they go along? We each have fears and anxieties in our individual lives, and we worry about our ability to cope. It's easy to find yourself worrying about being worried, having anxiety about being anxious, and being afraid of living in fear. And it can be especially hard because something that a lot of us have right now is a lot of extra time on our hands as we shelter in place. I don't know about you, but I find that my mind has definitely been racing more during this quarantine. Some mornings I will be just on the verge of waking up, and I'll think that the pandemic situation has only been a bad dream. And then I fully wake and realize, nope, that is the reality. How do we keep our anxieties, fears, and worries from getting the better of us? What I'd like to do is to offer some spiritual food for thought. And we're going to do that by taking an imaginary voyage out on the water. Humor me, if you will, and picture yourself in a boat. And let us sail out and begin, literally, at the beginning. In the very first chapter of the Judeo-Christian book of Genesis, it reads, "In the beginning, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, when a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. God saw that the light was good. So God separated the light from the darkness. And it was evening, and it was morning one day." Notice that darkness preceded light. One day is complete only when it includes both darkness and light. It would be nice, of course, if life could be filled with only light and no darkness. But moments of darkness will, of course, come and go in our lives. The question is not if there will be darkness, but rather how will we deal with the darkness when we encounter it? How will we take that darkness and separate the light from it? what light will we be able to find to come out of that darkness? Continuing on our imaginary journey, we stare over the side of our boat. We look into the water. And down there on the floor of the sea is a lobster. This is a story told by Dr. Abraham Twersky. He's a psychiatrist, an addiction specialist, and an ordained Jewish rabbi. And if you are interested, he has these great, short, insightful videos that you can find on YouTube. Anyway, this is his story. A lobster is a soft, mushy animal that lives inside of a rigid shell. That rigid shell does not expand. So how can the lobster grow? Well, as the lobster grows, that shell becomes very confining, and the lobster feels itself under pressure and is uncomfortable. It goes under a rock formation to protect itself from predators, casts off the shell, and produces a new one. Well, eventually that shell, in turn, becomes very uncomfortable as the lobster continues to grow. Back under the rocks it goes. The lobster repeats this numerous times. The stimulus for the lobster to be able to grow is that it feels uncomfortable. Now, Rabbi Twersky argues if lobsters had doctors, they would never grow, because as soon as the lobster felt uncomfortable, it could go to the doctor, get a tranquilizer, get a painkiller. It would feel fine, and it would never have to cast off its shell. But of course, lobsters don't have doctors. And the lesson here that we need to realize is that times of stress, times like we find ourselves in, are also times that signal growth. And if we use adversity properly, we can grow by way of that adversity. As a rule, most of us aren't big on stress and discomfort. I have yet to meet someone who enjoys those things. We like things the way we like them, to stay in our comfort zones. And this pandemic was like a big old hand that came along and shoved us out of our comfort zones. But the lesson of the lobster is that without that occasional stress and discomfort, we would not be able to grow. If we look at our own lives, and if we are honest with ourselves, we realize that many of our greatest periods of growth were often preceded by a time of anxiety, stress, or pain. Change is inevitable, and it isn't always comfortable. If we resist it, we at best stagnate and at worst suffer. But if we work with it, we grow and perhaps find new opportunities and ways of looking at things. If nothing else, the upheaval of this quarantine has provided us, and I suspect society at large, with tremendous opportunity in that regard. Finally, let's steer our imaginary boats into the teachings of Taoism. Another word for the Tao is the way. It is the natural flow of the universe. It is the way of all things. It exists beyond the ability of words to describe it. In Taoist thinking, the more we live in harmony with this divine flow, the more at peace we will be. Think of it like a river. We're in our boat, remember? It's easier if you go with the current than against it. People sometimes interpret this as a quiet resignation to the way things are. But it's more along the lines of how we handle our boats in the current. When you're in a boat that's going with the flow of the river, you would struggle to get it back to where you were before. You also can't deal with what's ahead, upstream, until you get there. All you have is where you are right now. Focus on that. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, is believed to have said, if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. The reason I wanted to take you on this imaginary voyage using the analogy of boats is that it is very much representative of the situation in which we find ourselves. We are not all in the same boat during this pandemic, but we are all in the same water. Even though times are tough, I think it helps to remember that we all have this shared experience in common. Part of me thinks that this pandemic will change us when it ends. Maybe we'll learn and grow and do some things differently and do them better. The more cynical part of me wonders if people will forget and go right back to the way they were before. Only time will tell. In the meantime, cultivate resilience. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help when you need it. Take a break, step back, recharge. It's okay. Take stock of the things that really matter and focus on those. Remember that we're all in the same water. We're all dealing with this to one extent or another. And perhaps most importantly, be there for one another. The 14th century saint, Teresa of Avila, once said that God has no hands but our hands to do God's work today. Take care of yourselves, but also try to be God's hands in our tired, anxious, and worrisome world. Amen. Now here's Mark with Bridge Over Troubled Water. close with this prayer adapted from the words of Kenneth P. Langer. Let us pray. Let us find peace within, so that we may be calm throughout. Let us find silence within, so that we may find compassion throughout. Let us be reminded that some things are worth waiting for. Let us be reminded that the journey is more important than reaching the destination. Let us see that the non-doing is as much a part of life as the doing. Let us be reminded that it is in these moments of holding on that we can find quietude and renewal. It is within these times of inaction that we can find rest. It is in these times of emptiness that we can become full. Amen. Thank you for joining us today from wherever you are and whenever you're watching. We hope to, well, if we don't hope to, we will be here next week with a special Memorial Day service with special music and readings. But for now, let us end by extinguishing our chalice while Mark sings our benediction, Be Ours a Religion.